Hey everyone, my name's Jessie, welcome back to my channel, and today let's talk about some spooky books. So I'm going to link a couple of videos down below, including my top 10 favorite horror/thriller books and also some fall recommendation books, because I've done a couple videos like this in the past and I'm trying not to repeat any of the recommendations from those past videos. So if you don't see a particular book on this list and you're surprised that it's missing, it might be because it's on one of those other lists. So I'm going to try to give you kind of a lot of different types of spooky books, including some adult thrillers/horrors, some fantasies and sci-fis that have spooky elements, and then also some young adult books that I've recently found that have some really cool spooky elements as well. So let's get right into it. All right, so here are 5 different thriller/horror books that I recently have picked up and have loved. So the first one I have is Nosferatu by Joe Hill. This book feels to me like you could read it anytime between October and December, because if you don't know anything about Nosferatu, we follow a mysterious man who kidnaps children and takes them to a place called Christmas Town or Christmas Land. I forget which one. I get the one from Nightmare Before Christmas and this one mixed up. So it's either Christmas Town or Christmas Land. But basically it's this mysterious place that doesn't appear on any maps, but our main character Vic in this story has the ability to transport to places that other people can't go, and she is the one who is able to get to this land that no one else can get to, and basically has a run-in with our main antagonist Charlie Manx, and things go down from there. So what I love so much about this story is not only our main character Vic and the antagonist Charlie Manx, who I think is one of my favorite book villains of all time, but Vic, we follow her in her childhood and kind of see glimpses of her childhood, but then we also follow her as an adult, so you kind of see her grow and change, and then she has a child of her own that becomes threatened by our Charlie Manx villain. But why I think that this is so perfect for October through December is because the visuals and the creepy elements in this book are so chilling, and it all revolves around children, and they're singing Christmas songs that are very creepy, and there's all these creepy visuals of Christmas throughout. So I love this story. I can't recommend it enough for the characters, for Charlie Manx himself, he's fantastic, and for the visuals and creepy elements. The next horror book that I have for you is Nightmare by Chad Nicholas. This is a self-published thriller/horror book that follows a character named Scott who has a very mysterious past, and we're realizing that his past is starting to catch up with him when all of these people go missing and these mysterious things start happening to him. It's very much a psychological horror. We get flashback scenes of Scott and kind of things that happened to him in his childhood that made him who he is today. This one was so creepy because, one, I think psychological horrors for me are so creepy because you're just so wrapped up in someone's mind. You don't know what's real, what's fake. It's very creepy in that sense that you just don't know what to trust. And then to the visuals themselves in this, there are creepy scarecrows, there are crows throughout the book. It will make you terrified of crows and scarecrows. Like, it's all the creepy Halloween visuals, it's all in here. And I love this cover because when you take off the jacket, it also has this awesome naked hardback, and the back has a creepy scarecrow. So if that doesn't scream Halloween, I don't know what does. The next recommendation I have is a new favorite of all time, and that is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I mean, you can pick up any Grady Hendrix book around this time of year and just get all the spooky vibes that you're looking for. But in particular, My Best Friend's Exorcism is my favorite because of the character work. The 80s nostalgia is strong in this one. It is so much fun. We follow 2 best friends who are childhood best friends, grew up together, and they're now in high school in the 80s. The one best friend goes missing and returns a couple of hours later. Very different. Something happened, but she has no recollection of exactly what happened. And her best friend, our main character, Abby, thinks that something happened to her best friend that changed her, and if the title doesn't give it away, she thinks that her best friend is possessed. I love the blend of tones that Grady Hendrix is able to pull off so well. This feels very much like a horror, but it has this lighter tone to it that makes it not quite as scary. If you like anything set in the 80s, this is definitely a book for you. I couldn't get enough of the character work in this book, and I just loved the slow buildup of the friend slowly becoming more and more possessed. It's definitely one of my favorite books of all time. The next one I have is The Broken Girls by Simone St. James. I also recommended Simone St. James's other book, The Sundown Motel, in a previous video, which I do prefer The Sundown Motel, but I do want to make sure to give a shout out to The Broken Girls because it has so many of those creepy elements to this book that I loved from The Sundown Motel. It has very ghostly type elements to it. It follows two different timelines, one in the past in 1950 in Vermont, where there's this place called Idlewild Hall where all of these kind of unwanted girls are sent. And as these girls kind of grow up in this place, they realize that not everything is as it seems, and this place might be haunted. But we also follow a timeline more in the present in 2014 of a journalist who is trying to discover what happened to her sister years and years ago, which kind of leads her to this Idlewild Hall, which is now shut down, to figure out what happened in this place, what happened to her sister. And it's so good. It's so creepy. I love the way Simone St. James is able to kind of tell a story in two different timelines and make it sync up perfectly at the end with just this amazing climax. This one was really fun to follow, and I loved the girls in the past. That timeline, I loved those characters. So I highly recommend this one if you're looking for some creepiness, a good mystery, and if you've read The Sundown Motel and enjoyed it, I definitely would recommend this one as well. And the next book I have, of course, we have to mention Stephen King, and you can pick up any Stephen King around this time of year and I feel like really enjoy it. But the one that I recently read this year and fell head over heels in love with was Carrie. Prior to reading Carrie, The Shining was my favorite Stephen King, but now I think Carrie took that top spot just because I loved her story so much. I empathized so much with Carrie, and I just loved the creepiness with her mother and her home life, and also how the real villain of the story was the bullies at school that bullied Carrie and kind of drove her to do what she eventually does at the end of the book. If you know the story, you might know the ending already, but don't let that deter you from reading the actual book. It is fantastic, and I would also highly recommend the audiobook. The first film version of Carrie starred Sissy Spacek, and she actually narrates the audiobook, which I thought was a fantastic touch. Carrie herself is a character that you just feel so much for. I just felt so strongly connected to the story and just wanted the best for her, even though I knew where it was going to go in the end. So I can't recommend Carrie enough, and it definitely gives you the creepy Halloween vibes for sure, especially towards the end. All right, and if you're not much of a horror or thriller reader, but you maybe want some fantasy or sci-fi books that introduce some creepy horror-like elements to them, here are the three books that I would recommend personally. The first being City of Stairs by Robert Jackson Bennett. So at first glance, this definitely doesn't seem like it would be anything to do with horror, any spooky vibes whatsoever. This is an epic fantasy book in a world where it was originally built by gods. These gods have now disappeared, and we're kind of dealing with the aftermath of a society that used to rely on gods that are no longer there. But there is a murder mystery element to this book, and that murder mystery leads the characters to discovering some things that are extremely creepy. There are a couple of scenes in this book that felt full out horror to me. Some of the creatures, some of the visuals were so creepy, and Robert Jackson Bennett actually writes a lot of horror, so it felt very apparent reading this fantasy book that the author was very comfortable in the horror genre as well. So even though it doesn't seem like this would be a good spooky season read, I would actually highly recommend checking it out around spooky season if you're looking for a fantasy that has some creepy elements to it, because there are some creatures and there are some scenes in this that definitely creeped me out. The next book I have is Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark. This book is a novella that follows characters in 1915 when the Ku Klux Klan is kind of at full force. And this book is a historical fantasy that takes the Ku Klux Klan and introduces this element where the Ku Klux Klan members are actual monsters. So our main characters are kind of these monster hunters hunting down these Ku Klux Klan members. There are some really creepy visuals in this book. I absolutely loved the tone and the pacing. The character work is fantastic. This is such a fantastic novella, and usually I don't like novellas because I just always want more. And while like I would have loved more from this story, I thought it just packed such a punch in the amount of time we had with it. So this one is perfect for around spooky season. If you're looking for those horror vibes, this one is such a good one with like monsters and creepy visuals and a creepy villain. So good. So I love this one and can't recommend it enough. Then the last one I have in this category is Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. Again, one that you wouldn't think of for spooky season, but I actually read this in October last year and I was so glad I did, because even though this kind of starts off as a space opera murder mystery, that murder mystery leads the characters once again to discovering something that changes the direction of the plot in such a way where it becomes very horror. Like, there are definitely horror elements to this book that I ended up loving. Like, I was not into the book as much until this kind of discovery and change in direction and change in tone. It got so creepy, and there's body horror and just gross visuals. So this one is such a good one if you are looking for some creepy sci-fi vibes. Even though it doesn't start off as that, there's something that happens in the middle where it definitely turns into that, and I can't recommend it enough for that. I don't know if the rest of the books have any of those elements in them. I doubt that it continues kind of on that trajectory since it's such a large series, but this first book at least had some creepy elements to it, and I really appreciated it. And then I have two YA picks for you all. The first being a YA fantasy called Kingdom of Souls by Rena Barron. This one is a dark, witchy YA fantasy where we follow a family of witch doctors, and the daughter of this family always thinks that these powers are going to manifest in her as she gets older, since she comes from this family where they all have powers, but these powers never manifest. We discover very early on in this story that one of her best friends gets taken by a child snatcher, and in order to get her friend back and discover who took her friend, she has to kind of make this deal with this dark entity and has to trade something very, very valuable for this power. This book goes in so many different directions. It has so many twists and turns, but it went so much darker than I ever expected it to. And just because of the witchy feel and how dark this book gets, I think that this would be such a fun one to read around spooky season. If you don't want like full-on horror or thriller, but you just want some kind of spooky vibes, I loved this one. I thought the ending was just bonkers, fantastic, and I just loved the tone of this one. It felt very gritty, very dark. It has lots of family drama, and just, it's very good. So highly recommend this one if you're looking for a witchy YA fantasy. And then even though I wasn't a huge fan of this book, I do have to mention it because it's such a perfect October read, and that is Sawkill Girls by Claire Legrand. So Sawkill Girls follows this family that has moved to this new place called Sawkill just to kind of start over, start fresh. And this family has two sisters, and one of the sisters goes missing, and we're trying to figure out what happened. There are these strange disappearances that keep happening in Sawkill, and the book gets really, really dark. It is So creepy. I loved the first half of this book. I loved how creepy it felt. I loved the mystery and like figuring out where these girls are going, why are they disappearing. That was so much fun to follow. Where it fell apart for me just a little bit was the second half of this book and kind of the reveals I felt were just really out there. But a lot of people love this entire book, and it is such a good creepy read, and it does go pretty dark and disturbing for a young adult. So if you want those kind of vibes, I can't recommend this one enough. It's pretty dark, it's pretty gross, it's pretty gruesome, and it was a good time. Overall, like, I still enjoyed it and was glad I read it. I just preferred the first half of the book where we were just trying to discover what was going on. I thought it was so much fun. Those are all of the spooky reads that I have for you. What are your recommendations for good spooky season reads? I would love to know. This is always a genre I am looking for more of. I love horror and kind of creepy books, so leave all of those recommendations down below. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye.